Now, the Islamist murderer Harbi Ali is beginning a minimum 30-year sentence in prison today. It's likely to be a full life sentence, in fact, as he was led from the court. He smirked and he winked at the gallery, as well he might. In many countries, he'd now be facing the death penalty rather than the relative comfort of the British penal system. But perhaps that smirk is prompted by something else, the knowledge that you and I, the British taxpayer, will be paying for a proven terrorist to take his hate-fuelled ideology into prisons, where he'll potentially be able to indoctrinate other inmates at our largesse. This is, after all, a young man who has shown an adeptness at gaming the system to the jihadists' advantage. Before he murdered an MP, he successfully convinced a de-radicalisation programme that he posed no meaningful threat to the general public. Well, joining me now is Ian Acheson, a former prison governor and senior advisor at the Counter-Extremism Project. Ian Acheson, thanks so much for your time. I do appreciate it, and your expertise as a former prison governor too. What kind of conditions do you expect someone like this prisoner to be held in, and to what extent do you think he'll be able to contaminate others with his worldview?
Well, Colin, thanks for having me on, first of all. And can I just extend my sympathy to Sir David Amy's family, who also began a life sentence today, directly due to this narcissistic and arrogant terrorist. Clearly, with someone who's been convicted of such an outrageous crime, who has actually taken his ideological motivation to the extreme of murdering somebody, will be exceptionally risky when he goes into prison. One of the things I frequently say to audiences here, who sometimes I think could be forgiven for thinking the problem is now behind a high wall and will go away, is that certainly for ideologically motivated offenders like Islamist extremists, there are plenty of targets who are British citizens behind the walls, many of them whom, of course, men and women put on a uniform every morning and go into high security prisons to look after dangerous people like him. So I don't think the prison service will be taking any risks at all with the management of this individual. Obviously, he's been on remand for quite a considerable time before his conviction and his sentence today. So the service will have had ample opportunity to observe him. I would expect that, given the outrageous nature of his crime, and the fact that he is a jihadist who is, as I've said before, who's come through on his murderous intent, he would be probably at the extreme end of risk management. He would be a higher exceptional risk category A prisoner. You would expect him to, at least for a long period of time, where he continues to be under observation, be in some of our most secure custody inside a high security prison, like, for example, Belmarsh, which has a high security unit for very dangerous prisoners like Ahmed Hassan, the Parsons Green tube bomber, etc. But will his risk necessarily diminish now he's been sentenced and convicted? Well, that remains to be seen. Some terrorist prisoners, especially those who have carried out attacks to satisfy their twisted rationale, they will say, well, that's job done and I'm going to disappear into the background. Others who are thwarted may be more dangerous, but only time will tell whether this man can be successfully managed inside custody. He remains very much an unknown quantity, and I would expect the prison service to handle him with extreme care, certainly in the first months and possibly years of his sentence.
Again, you know far better than the vast majority of us what a topsy-turvy world, I suppose, prison is, where the normal rules of physics don't apply. In fact, in a sense, they're inverted, where somebody who's a pariah on the outside may even be venerated on the inside. I just wonder, you mentioned Belmarsh. If he were to go to Belmarsh, is there a sense in which he would enjoy sort of hero status amongst a small cadre?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think one of the reasons that I suggested in 2016, after doing a government review into Islamist extremism, that we set up separation centres, is that we need to turn people who may be charismatic, who may be, in the eyes of other credulous young men in prison for violence, susceptible to that sort of glamour, rock stars in inverted commas. We need to turn those people into ghosts, effectively. We need to completely incapacitate them from spreading their hateful ideology and their inspiration to others. So it's very important that wherever Harbi Ali ends up, he is absolutely prevented from exporting any of the, the dark glamour associated with his disgusting activities. I've said before, prisons are incubators of violent extremism. We have a prison system in this country, sadly, which, in many places it's hard to figure out who is in charge, whether it's prisoners or the staff. There are far too few staff, and particularly when you're dealing with ideologically motivated offenders, often they're very sophisticated and charismatic. You don't have training and expertise that is equipped to be able to manage these people safely. So, I am sure wherever he goes, he will need to be monitored very carefully. He absolutely must be prevented from capitalizing on this appalling brutality in any way at all. We have far too many people in prison, in the disordered environments that we see, unfortunately, that are all too ready to follow the lead of somebody like this. I don't know if you're interested, Colin, in talking about the prevent strategy.
We're going to save it, Ian. We're going to save it. We're going to save it for another day. But I'm keen that we do that because, as ever, your inside experience and your perspective on this, particularly on a day, I have to say, when we're talking about the fact we're obsessing about Partygate, and we were just saying actually a moment ago that means that there are other stories, unglamorous, unrecognised stories, which don't get the attention they deserve. I would say this is a prima facie example of it. We'll talk about it some other time. But Ian, thanks so much as ever for your expertise. Thanks very much indeed, Ian Acheson there.